Now, the furore surrounding allegations of sexual harassment against Hollywood film producer Harvey Weinstein has led to a flood of people, mainly women, registering that they have suffered abuse. One internet campaign called Me Too has prompted an online debate with millions of people sharing their experiences. The hashtag was the idea of actress Alyssa Milano as a means of illustrating the prevalence of sexual assault and harassment. So, have we turned a blind eye to sexual harassment? We're here to discuss that. Dawn Foster, a journalist and author, Dr. Zoe Strimple, a writer and historian of gender and relationships, Sharma Pereira, a writer and broadcaster, and Mike Buchanan from Political Justice for Men and Boys. Zoe, millions of people are said to have signed up to the hashtag #MeToo. Should we be worried about that?
Maybe a little bit. I mean, there is something about the dynamics of these global hashtag social media campaigns that I do find a little bit troubling. And I think, in a way, the one thing we might be a little bit troubled about is if this becomes the way we deal with endemic issues in society. I am a bit uneasy by some of the dynamics that have come off of this. I think it's great that the ubiquity of the issue is being highlighted. I think it's really positive that women are perhaps feeling less alone. However, I don't like the way it flattens things out, makes men into one big monolithic, monstrous group, predatory group, and women into what strikes me as being part of a kind of victim narrative, which sort of includes all women in it. And I think this is an area where there is grey, not just black and white, and the dynamics of this hashtag, I think, completely kind of destroy that ability to think about it in terms of greys.
Dawn, the victim narrative. Do you see it like that?
I don't. I think a lot of women have, you know, myself included, been subject to sexual harassment, and I think one of the main issues that women have with this, and one of the things that really made this so prevalent, was the fact that when you are sexually harassed in the workplace, when you are sexually assaulted, it's very, very difficult to get justice. And, you know, if you go to the human resources, you know, at work, it's very, very rare for anything to actually be done. It's very much he says, she says, and that tends to, you know, work against women. So I think a lot of women, you know, have felt ignored for a long time. I think Harvey Weinstein has actually made people realise how prevalent it is, and I've spoken to a lot of my male friends who didn't realise just how many women they know who've been subject to this sort of thing.
So do you think that will change now with this hashtag #MeToo and the Harvey Weinstein?
I hope so.
In terms of the workplace, when you complain to HR?
I think so, definitely. I mean, I've been on radio a lot. I've spoken to a lot of people who are now a lot more aware of their rights. A lot of lawyers have been talking about how women can gather evidence to stop this from happening. And I think workplaces will be a lot more wary about brushing this under the carpet, you know, as they did with Harvey Weinstein.
Sharma, have we been guilty of ignoring sexual harassment?
Yes, I think as part of the generation that grew up with the pill and abortion for the first time, I think it was the Wild West sexually. Women were able to have sex when they wanted, and so were men, without any fear of there being a baby or any kind of redress. And what happened was we all sort of jumped into it like children in a sweet shop. And the result was a kind of a lack of boundaries because we didn't know where the boundaries were. So in my generation, lots of us suffered sexual harassment at work and everywhere else. But we saw it as part of a game at that point because we were setting up the board, if you like. I think now all the pieces are in place on that board. It's time to say, what are the rules? And I'm really glad that this hashtag has set that debate running. Certainly in my age group, I find we are all discussing things and saying, oh, in that particular situation, actually, it probably was rape, but we let it go then. I'm so glad that my daughters now in their 20s will not.
So this is like chapter 2 of the sexual revolution then?
Yes, it is. You know, you have to understand a landscape before you can start mapping it. And we forget that it's only in 1 or 2 generations that we've had the freedom to sleep with who you want and how you want. And of course, that means that people on both sides have taken advantage of the fact that there are no rules.
Mike, you're sitting there well-behaved, not saying much. Let's bring you in. This week, a lot of men have used the week to reflect on some of their actions in the past and how they will treat women respectfully in the future. Is that something you've done this week?
I think the vast majority of men do respect women and treat them well. The idea that men as a class somehow bear some sort of gendered guilt for the actions or the alleged actions of individual men is just ludicrous. I mean, women don't feel ashamed of themselves as a class because of Myra Hindley, and we wouldn't expect them to. And also, something also that is never mentioned in these things is male victims of sexual offences, and we know from a major American study that more than a quarter of the victims of sexual offences are men who've been the victims of women.
Are you worried, though, that men are being grouped together? We're all maybe feeling that, people are pointing the finger.
Well, the finger is being pointed.
Yeah.
Is
that how you feel?
That's what this is all about.
But it's about taking responsibility, surely. It's not about pointing the finger. It's asking men to take responsibility for things that are done by members of their group.
Well, that's exactly what we should not do.
But shouldn't we be pleased, though, that women are able to talk about this now, when in the past they haven't been able to?
Well, it'd be nice if men were able to talk about it as well, but the BBC never covers that, or male victims of domestic violence.
But with all due respect, there appear to be far more female victims of this.
No, there aren't. That's nonsense.
So there are the same amount of men?
There are a comparable number of men who are the victims of domestic violence as women. Hundreds of studies tell us that. Hundreds of studies.
Okay. Zoe?
So I was just going to say that I want this to reach as many men as possible, for as many men as possible to take responsibility, but I sometimes worry that the men who quite frequently can make me feel very uncomfortable, those lurking on street corners, those who are unwatched on the tube platform at night, I'm not sure they're tuning into these debates, and so I do worry that when nice friends of ours take responsibility and sort of feel bad about it and think deeply about these issues, I do sometimes wonder if some category of people who really make one feel actually quite physically afraid, if they're actually being completely sort of not touched by this, and so that's why, and again, it makes me question the utility of some of these hashtag kind of movements.
OK, let's go to Emma for another perspective from men.
Yes, well, I'm joined now by Jack Beresford, who writes for Loaded magazine. Jack, Loaded magazine, not necessarily known for championing the rights of women, more their bits. How have you covered this story this week?
I think we've tried to cover it in as honest a way as possible, really. I think, personally speaking, as a man, I feel a great sense of shame about what's gone on, really, in Hollywood and within society as a whole. So it's about putting the facts out there, and rather than writing some sort of editorial piece saying, oh, is it all right to put a kiss at the end of an email or anything like that? It's about saying, there are problems there and men need to wake up to that and, offer themselves up and say, what can I do to help?
But how do you have that debate with men? I mean, lots of your readers, I presume, are men. How do you say to them, this is how you should treat women, without making them feel patronised or themselves extremely defensive?
Because I think modern men should be open to those ideas anyway, and I think we've had situations with readers where they haven't necessarily responded in the right kind of way, and I'm not sure we necessarily want to cater that kind of market anymore, really.
So who are you catering for? What is Loaded or Men's Mags Today really trying to do?
I think Men's Mags Today are about promoting a kind of culture that's gender inclusive. And that means, stuff that's going to appeal to men and women and anyone of any kind of sexuality. And that means, moving away from photo shoots, which we don't do anymore, and taking some of that sort of focus on women as kind of eye candy out of our publication.
This is quite a volte-face from somebody working for Loaded magazine. I mean, could you understand why people would say in the past men's magazines have been guilty for perhaps encouraging the view that women are just pieces of meat to be gawped at and hopefully touched?
100%. And that's why I think it's a positive thing to have a magazine like ourselves kind of holding our hands up and saying, in the past we were perpetrators of that kind of thing, but times have changed, we don't want to be part of that anymore, and in order to affect change you have to be shown to doing it yourself.
All right, well, let's see what people think online. Jack, thanks very much for getting in touch with us this morning. Anne says, who's been getting in touch here, of course society has turned a blind eye to sexual harassment, none more than people in power. The only reason the hashtag #MeToo has taken off is one famous man did it to celebrities. If they hadn't spoken, society would have continued to turn a blind eye to it. Heather says, when I started work in the 60s, you only got hired if you were a dolly bird, and gropes and comments were part of the furniture. I'm glad this behaviour is now being challenged. And Aisha says the #MeToo hashtag has helped women, men, girls and boys to come forward without judgment and shame. But Susan says there is an issue with this for sure, but I think that some women have taken advantage of it, using their sex appeal to get what they want, but then moaning if the wrong man gives them attention. And Bill says, I don't understand why these women didn't come forward before. It seems like bandwagon jumping to me, people confusing cheeky flirting with out-and-out sexual assault. Sure.
Emma, thank you. Well, we'll go back to what Jack Beresford said from Loaded. He said, Mike, that he felt shame about what had happened in Hollywood, and you were shaking your head.
I think that's just ridiculous. I mean, we're talking about a Hollywood mogul here. We're not talking about the Archbishop of Canterbury. The idea that I or any other man watching this programme should feel any shame through the actions of the alleged actions of Harvey Weinstein is just ridiculous.
And we heard one viewer there, Dawn, talking about bandwagon jumping. Now they're all coming out of the shadows saying that this happened to me. Why didn't they say it before? What do you think, Dawn?
A lot of them did say it before. A lot of them spoke to lawyers. A lot of them were pushed aside over and over again. We've seen people resign from Amazon as a result. We've seen lots of women come out and say that they spoke to lawyers and reported it and nothing happened. And, time and again, when I've seen a lot of women using this hashtag coming forward, I spoke to a HR department I worked in, and I was told simply to avoid going for work drinks, and as a result wasn't promoted afterwards when I was sexually harassed repeatedly by a colleague. And women have been coming forward for a long time, but obviously, now they feel that actually we might be being listened to.
So we've seen quite a lot this week in the papers, instructions on how men should act around women. That's a bit patronising, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I think there are some issues here about women being a certain group that can't handle certain things, and I think there's sort of a plethora of behaviours. But I guess my sort of concern with the way the debate has gone is that I think some of the root issues are being overlooked, and I think we need to get to sort of what's going on in girlhood, what's going on in schools, what's going on in families, such that these dynamics occur and are entrenched. And I think that for women, a lot of the issues are about confidence. And interestingly, I what Dawn is saying, some women have been coming forward with these things, but not all of them feel able to, and that's a confidence issue. So these are these root problems that get completely glossed over with these sort of tip of iceberg explosions, which I think this sort of slightly has been. And I want to see more analysis of why these things are sort of still in place in the first place.
Sharma, when Mike said men were just as much victims as women, you said he's hijacking the debate.
Well, I did, because the point is we're talking about all victims of sexual abuse or sexual harassment. We're concentrating on women simply because women have come forward. It doesn't preclude men having the same problem or them complaining about it or any future legislation or guidelines, of course, covering men. They should cover everyone. What we are now doing is writing the rules. Of course, men don't have responsibility for what other men do, but they should have responsibility in the sense of showing concern. This week, Scotland banned the smacking of children. I hope every parent out there, male and female, is thinking, should I smack my child? Should I not? And is that person smacking that child abusing them? In exactly the same way, men and women have to think about sexual harassment of people, whether it's in a train station or in an office, and say, what should I do about it?
So, Sharma, what can a man do and what can't a man do, say in the workplace?
I think you just call people out. I never used to call people out for being racists before, but I do now since Brexit, because I suddenly realise it's even in my friendship group. And that's what men have to do when they're talking.
But what if a man is attracted to a woman in the workplace?
There's a huge difference between trying it on in the sense of, do you want to go out with me? Gosh, you're really pretty. Can we have a drink? And actually touching your clothes or taking their own clothes off. We're not talking about somebody making a verbal pass. We're talking about somebody asking for things, showing body parts, touching other people's body parts. Don't turn it into some silly little playground squabble. This isn't. This is a behind-the-doors harassment that we are discussing.
OK, and I'm sure it will go on and on, but not here, because we are out of time. Thank you all very much indeed.
Thank you.